Hi, I'm Luann Hunn, and welcome to the March edition of Lynchburg 360, the show that takes you all around the great city of Lynchburg, and occasionally to our neighboring localities as well. If you've ever driven through Roanoke, chances are you've driven past this oddly shaped building and wondered, what in the world is that? In this month's Day Tripper segment, Steve Smallshaw takes us inside the unique architecture of the Tubman Art Museum and shows us some of the artistic treasures inside.
I guess one of the first things that a first-time visitor to Taubman is struck by is the building itself. It is a work of art unto itself.
We consider this a beautiful piece of art in downtown Roanoke. It opened in 2008, and over the next 7 years it's growing up and becoming a welcoming sight into the Roanoke area. Our architect, Randall Stout, very carefully considered the community and the materials as he was building the building. Everything that you see about it is 12 roof lines that simulate the rolling mountains. The beautiful peak that's part of the atrium is 1/5 the Roanoke Star. The materials have all been very carefully selected. The colors, the zinc, the steel, even the patina on the outside reflects our beautiful red clay soil.
So it definitely works to bring people into the building.
Well, you know, people always say, what is that place? Once they come inside, it's a delightful experience of art and programming.
Tell me a little bit about what they can expect to see once they do come inside.
When you come into the museum, there are lots of opportunities to see original works of art. Everything from local, regional, state, American, as well as a global look. We have 10 galleries that are on view, changing every 3 months, so it's an experience to come back every time. In addition to seeing art, we have lots of fun things to do. Music, children's classes, adult wine and paint, just about anything you can think of, art and culture.
So something for someone from all ages, basically.
One of the favorite things to do in the museum is our children's art venture. It's an interactive gallery designed for children 2 years all the way up to 12 or 13, and it's a chance for them to look at original art, then be inspired, then create their own art.
And that's an important audience to reach, I would think.
The museum has a very strong focus on education. We want to make sure that we are reinforcing art, culture, history, heritage, and helping them understand more about themselves and their community.
With schools seeming to de-emphasize, things like the arts and music and that sort of thing in favor of just, concentrating on a core curriculum, how important is it to have a place like the Taubman where kids can come?
The museum certainly serves as a way to reinforce not only the standards of learning for our school children, but it's an opportunity to teach them more about art and culture. I come to this museum as the director, but my background is in education. And I am fiercely committed to making sure that our school children, our homeschool groups, our families have an opportunity to come to this museum and have an educational experience while enjoying every minute they're here.
Is it a mixture of art, all different genres and mediums?
One of the fun things about coming to the museum is you're able to experience lots of different kinds of art. We have a beautiful gallery that has Judith Lieber handbags, sparkling and jeweled handbags that just bedazzle you. We have contemporary art, artists working and living today. We have a collection of American art going back 100 years, and traveling exhibitions. And we're happy to say that as exhibitions come in and out of the building, it's lots of different types of things. In March, opening March 20th, is the Art of Norman Rockwell. That's an opportunity to see original works of art by one of America's most beloved storytellers.
Like you said, you have traveling exhibitions and they swap in and out, so a one-time visit is just not enough. You need to keep coming back.
Every 3 or 4 months we change out the art. That is so that every time you come and visit, you'll have a new experience. It may be arts from another country, it may be arts from a different style, it may change history. Every single time it's new and fun.
To someone watching this in Lynchburg or Central Virginia area, what do you say to tell them to say, hey, come on, it's worth a trip and an hour's drive over to come see this?
The museum is a premier destination here in Southwest Virginia. Travelers come from within several hours drive to see one-of-a-kind art, to enjoy our programming, and certainly have a new experience.
Now we head to another museum, which is also displaying some works of art, but probably not the kinds you've ever seen before. At the Lynchburg Museum at the Old Courthouse this month, be prepared to find out more about the fascinating world of quilts and quilt making.
Well, we're at the Lynchburg Museum, and we've just opened a new exhibit on Central Virginia quilts and textiles. The exhibit is going to run until the end of this year, December of 2016. It came about, we had a First Friday devoted to different quilts we had in our collection, and we got an overwhelmingly positive response from the community, and we thought that we'd like to expand that and do a larger exhibit. Well, we have a great variety of old and new quilts, and we've also got some really old samplers, which is alphabet needlework. The oldest one we've got is from 1798, so it's pretty old, and it belongs to the Norval family, which is a prominent Lynchburg name. Well, for the exhibit, we borrowed quilts from a variety of institutions and organizations, such as the Amherst County Museum, Campbell County. We borrowed from the Bedford Museum and the Virginia Quilt Museum. But we also borrowed from local quilters, including Frances Calhoun. She made the Lynchburg Landmarks quilt, which is the icon of our exhibit. And we also borrowed from Frances Butler and Patsy Meyer. And the quilt Patsy made is particularly interesting. It's the large blue and white one behind me, and it is a copy of an 1863 Jane Stickle quilt. Jane Stickle was a quilter, or a woman living in Vermont during the Civil War, and she made this quilt while her husband was away. And what's interesting about it is that it's composed of over 200 different blocks.
My grandmother had left several quilts, and she died when I was just an infant, but there were some unfinished quilt blocks, and over the years I kept looking at those, and finally in 1973 I decided I would put them together and try to make a quilt. My work tends to be toward the traditional rather than the contemporary. There's much modern quilting. In fact, there's a movement now called modern quilting, which is really not appealing to me. I like things based on traditional patterns, but having a unique interpretation. The name of this quilt is Vintage Landmarks, Lynchburg, Virginia, and I had been collecting pictures of the older buildings in Lynchburg for many years. I've lived in Lynchburg for 26 years, and almost to begin with I was struck by all the wonderful vintage buildings. So I began to collect photographs, some that I made, some out of publications, newspaper, whatever, and I chose these to put into a quilt. And of course here is the courthouse, the museum, and Monument Terrace, Point of Honor, the aviary at Miller Park, Old Jones Memorial Library, and this one at the top is my house. That's up in the Garland Hill Historic District, Quaker Meeting House, and Spencer Home, the water pitcher, which is now at the Old City Cemetery. It was up by the waterworks at the time I made this in 1999, and then the Miller Park Fire Station. But I started with a photograph of each one and converted that to a line drawing, and then I chose my fabrics to suggest the various building materials. And if one looks closely, there's a variety of things in here that would not normally be used. In other words, this would not be suitable for use on a bed as a coverlet. It is strictly for show because it has things like ribbon and lace and various things that I use to depict what I wanted to. Not much. I've never sold one, ever. and I don't intend to. I've given away a few, but I have most of them. I have probably between 30 and 40 large quilts that I've made, plus innumerable small pieces, wall hangings, pillows. I've even made a few garments like jackets or vests that feature patchwork and quilting. I call this incredible edibles from a Virginia garden. And these are veggies that you would typically find growing right here in Lynchburg, and then grapevines, which you would often find on the fence that surrounds the vegetable garden. And this quilt really showcases a lot of the fabrics, because there's probably over 100 different pieces of fabric in this quilt. For instance, I have a whole stack of fabrics that I set aside that will make grapes, and that's why I liken it to painting, because I look for fabrics that have shading, such as light and dark on the same piece, so that it tends to give shape. For instance, the purple on the turnips. But grapes are a favorite of mine. I have several quilts that picture grapes. Well, I find the handwork is very relaxing and enjoyable, and I do all of my applique and my quilting by hand. I do some piecing on the sewing machine, but as far as machine quilting, that's just not what I do. And speed is not one of my high priorities. I'm willing to take whatever time it takes to do it like I want it, and some of the magazines sort of lead people toward doing things quickly, like make a quilt in a weekend or a quilt block in a day, and that is not my style of working. Well, this one is New York Beauty, and the reason I call it that, this block is based on a very old traditional pattern called New York Beauty, and there are many, many variations. The number of little spokes in each quarter of the design varies, and I actually drafted my own pattern for this, and I've seen variations of this in current magazines, and many of them are being pieced onto paper and then torn off, but mine are cut and pieced right sides together in the traditional fashion on the sewing machine, and then all of the flowers, the applique, the embroidery, and the quilting is all done by hand. Well, it is not a cheap enterprise, and it has gotten more and more, very much more expensive since I first started 40-some years ago. Good cotton fabric now is between $12 and $14, $15 a yard. When I first started, it was like $2.99. So when you consider the fabric that it takes to make the quilt top, the batting that goes in it, and the backing that holds all the layers together, you know, there's really no way to estimate the cost, but probably several $100s for, you know, if you went and purchased all the fabric at one time. The inspiration for this one was the window, the rose window in the north transept of the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. I purchased some postcards of each one of the stained glass windows there, and it took me 2 or 3 years to figure out how to convert that into a quilt. I wanted it to look like stained glass, obviously, and this is done by a completely different method from most of my other quilts, in that the design was drawn onto the black background here, and that is the top layer. And then as I cut out each one of the openings, I cut and placed each individual piece of the fabric underneath it. And as you can see, it's cut so that it's not randomly cut. Each piece was cut in order to make it look like a circle in the middle there. And the fabric that is representing the stained glass is an Indonesian batik, and it's a one-of-a-kind fabric that obviously comes from Indonesia. And it's not bought off of a bolt. It comes in one length, usually about 1.5 yards long, and that's all I had. So I had to, once I found the perfect fabric, I had to make it do to fill all of the spaces because there was no more available. I just kind of like having my work to be unique, sort of one-of-a-kind quilts. It's creative, and it's just something that I enjoy doing. I enjoy going back looking at the finished product, but I like every step of it, from just the thought process through the design process and the actual making of the quilt. I enjoy showing them too. I have entered them in many shows. They've been in magazines, books, and I think sharing them is one of the nicest things about it.
That's it for this edition of Lynchburg 360. Whether it's rain, snow, or a sunny day, there's always a great excuse to get out and enjoy all the wonderful things Central Virginia has to offer. And when you do, make sure to take some time to enjoy the view.